Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Tipping Point. Now Tipping Point is a game about growing your city and getting your citizens to thrive. You need to be managing your cash flow so you can get more developments, and you need to be managing your food production so you can feed your people. But with that, you're also going to be affecting the environment by generating CO2. And of course, you're not alone in trying to grow your city. The other players are doing the same thing in their cities, and your combined CO2 emissions are affecting the environment. Now this theme really interests me, so I was eager to get this one to the table. The basic mechanisms of the game is really just card play. You draw a citizen card into your town, purchase new development, and of course you adjust your stats. And when all players have had a turn, you perform the environmental impact phase by drawing cards from a weather deck. Now, although that sounds typical, the way it's implemented here I found very intriguing. So, will this be a game that you're going to be holding on to, or should it just be left blowing in the wind? Let's get it to the table, see what's played, then we'll come back with my final thoughts on Tipping Point. Here's Tipping Point set up for 3 players. Now there are 3 modes to this game: competitive, semi-cooperative, and 2v2. For this walkthrough I'm going to be showing the competitive mode. Not much changes in the gameplay between modes, it's just the end game that changes. Now each player is given a large farm development card and 1 forest development card. These are always the starting cards and have an orange back on them. The development cards are shuffled and deal out a 3x4 grid face up. The citizen cards are shuffled face down, as are the weather cards. Each player is given a status board and 3 markers to mark off their cash flow, CO2, and food production. Since you start with the farm and forest, you'll start with $2 cash flow, 0 CO2 emissions, and 3 food production. All the various tokens are placed off to one side, and the timeline track is placed where all players can see it, and the black cylinder starts on 2010. The aim of the competitive game is to get 10 or more citizens in your city when the timeline reaches 2100 or any decade before that. If no player has 10 or more at that time, there is no winner of the game. Each decade, each player will add a new citizen to their city, optionally demolish old development cards, and then develop their city. Since this is a card-based game, let's have a look at the 2 main types of cards. Citizen cards represent the people who come to live in your city. They will have a job, they will show how they affect your stats, and have a special ability. Usually, when a special ability is used, the character card is flipped over, and when they flipped over, they will always give you 1 income, but consume 1 food. Once a citizen has been flipped over, they can never be flipped back again. Whenever any of the cards affects your stats, you always adjust your status board accordingly. Now development cards function essentially the same way. They will have a cost to buy, a category, any special ability, and of course stat adjustments. Now there is one stat that is not on your status board, and that is energy consumption or energy production. Whenever you buy an energy producer, you will take its markers. Any development that requires energy will only affect your status and be usable if it is powered. To power development, take one of your power tokens and place it on that building. That development is now powered, and adjust your stats accordingly. If you decide not to power it for a turn, then you need to undo the stat changes as the building is now not operating. There is another special type of development card, and that is the research cards. These cards can only be purchased if the university card has been purchased and powered with electricity, or with a certain citizen card. So, back to the gameplay. On a player's turn, they will add a new citizen, optionally demolish an existing card in their town, then develop the city. The first thing a player must do is draw 1 new citizen card, and after the year 2050, you will always be drawing 2 citizen cards. These citizens have now moved into your town and adjust your stats accordingly. Next, you have the option to demolish an old development card, that is, get rid of them from your town. This is free, and you just place them in the discard pile, and as always, adjust your stats. The last part of a player's turn is the develop city phase. You can use any of the special abilities such as citizen cards or other development cards, and each time you use an ability, remember to update your stats, especially when using your citizens. They'll be flipped over when used and can alter their money and food. You can purchase 1 development card from the market. You must have the cash flow equal to or greater than the cost of the development. You do not adjust your cash flow. You just have to meet or exceed the cost. Unspent money is not saved to the next round. Replace the just purchased card in the market and adjust your stats for the new card. Now some cards require electricity. You do not need electricity to purchase them, but they are not active. That is, they will not alter your stats or grant you the special ability until they are powered. Also remember that research cards cannot normally be purchased unless there is a powered university on the table or you have a citizen that allows it. Once all players have done their turn, we go to the weather phase. You must first feed your citizens. If your food production is less than 0, that means you cannot feed all your citizens in your city. You must discard the citizens until you are at a net 0 for food. Then, clearing the disaster tokens from previous rounds. You're now going to determine how many weather cards you're going to reveal. Look at the total CO2 from all the players on the table, and then consult the chart. One at a time, you're going to reveal weather cards. The very first weather card of the game is going to be turned face up, and a single weather card never does anything. All subsequent cards will be added to the one previously played, and the order is important. So, if we have to draw 3 cards in the first round, we draw the first one, and of course nothing happens. The second one is placed to the right of the first one, and we check the chart to see if any disasters happen. Once we have actioned this new combo, the first card is discarded, and the second card is moved left. Then we draw a new card to the right, and check this combo for disasters. And of course there can be multiple disasters in a row. You will continue this process until all subsequent weather cards have been pulled. You will handle all disasters as outlined on the disaster card, and anytime you see an X in the disaster, for example, all players lose X citizens, this X refers to the number underneath your marker on your CO2 track. Once the disaster phase is done, you will advance the timeline by 1 decade. The game will end when 1 or more players meets their winning condition, and in this competitive game, a player must have at least 10 citizens at the time you advance the time track, and they would be the winner. But if you reach 2100 and none of the players have a winning number of citizens, then all players lose. And if at any time during the game, your net CO2 exceeds the defined limit for the number of players, all players will also lose. Now let's get back to see what I thought about Tipping Point.
So, theme and components. The theme in this one is very, very well done, and the idea of what you're doing actually affecting the environment and weather just works so well, and honestly, it makes sense. You develop a coal power plant, you add CO2 to the environment, and if you plant a forest, you capture the CO2 from the environment. This theme is what drives this game forward. You're making decisions on how much risk you're willing to take. And everything in the game kind of revolves around this theme. So very, very well done. The components themselves are fine. They're mainly just a deck of cards, and they're decent quality. And the art kind of has that same simplistic art style, which I like. And the layout of the cards, they're nice and consistent, so you always know how to read them. Now, I did have a few minor issues with the development cards, though. The research icon. Now, if you look here, it's at the very top of the screen. It should have been bigger. I don't know how many games I've had when at least one person mistakenly bought these, realizing that they couldn't buy them because they didn't have the proper prerequisites. I also wish that maybe they were a different color. I mean, they already have the green and the gray cards in here, so I'm not sure why there wouldn't be another color, just splash these to kind of highlight that you can't buy these. The second thing is the special abilities on these cards, or the abilities. So all the cards have a little saying on the top corner here. So that is a regular saying, and that is a special ability. Now it does have an exclamation point beside it. I wish it was bigger. And maybe, another way to highlight that from, because often you have several cards in front of you and the 12 cards to pick from the market, and you're kind of wondering which is which. So it'd be nice to have a little way to say, hey, these have an abilities, maybe have a look at them. But these things are not game breaking. So on to the gameplay. This is where it kind of gets tricky. The game can be competitive, semi-co-op, or 2v2, and I'm not sure which mode this game was actually designed for. In the competitive mode, there's the ability to trade, or cards that seem to be beneficial to cooperative play. But then for the semi-cooperative play, there are army cards that allow you to steal other players' developments. So maybe 2v2 is the way to play this game? I'm not sure, but that mode did feel the most cohesive of play because of the effects of certain cards, and the teams can kind of share the protection cards. The other modes didn't feel quite as robust. Now overall, I like this game, and I think maybe I want to like it more because of the theme, but I did have some major issues with the actual gameplay. First, and the biggest one for me, is the card distribution. There are 63 regular development cards, and of those, 26 require energy, but there's only 7 energy producing cards in that deck. There's no way to wipe the cards, except for one type of citizen card, and it has to be used as soon as you get it, not when you need it. Now, we often got into situations where there are no cards we wanted to buy or could buy because they were either research cards, which we couldn't even buy, or they required energy. And in a 3-player game, if you assume one person was going to buy a development card each turn, you're only going to go through half the deck. In a game where you have a limited number of rounds, it didn't feel right that some rounds you were maybe just taking cards to move the deck along. I wish there was more of a curated deck, for example, like 3 stages. So the first 3 or 4 rounds you're drawing from deck A, and then you move on to, next 3 or 4 you're going to deck B, etc. The other issue I had was actually with the citizen cards. You just drew random ones off the top of the deck. Why not have 3 face up and let me pick which ones I want to draw, or draw blind? There are student cards in the deck that can't be turned face down unless you have an educator, and the only thing they do is eat food. These students are only useful if you have 3 of them in front of you. There's only 5 in the entire deck. And they always tended to be the first ones sacrificed to starvation. I think with a few little tweaks, that citizen issue for me could have been fixed. I also wasn't a big fan of the military component. It's such a minor element in this game, but kind of really felt out of place. There are 6 soldiers in the citizen deck and 2 military bases in the development deck. They can be used to capture an infrastructure card from another player, or defend yourself from someone taking one of your infrastructures. But it really seemed to be out of step with the rest of the theme of this game, and I would very happily get rid of those cards. And the last negative, there sometimes can be no winner in a competitive game. And this is not a random occurrence. It happened more than 50% of the competitive games I played. It becomes very difficult to get 10 citizens fed and to survive the disasters later on in the game. And we've actually called the game early because there's no way anyone could win because there's only a round or 2 left and there's no way someone can get the 10 citizens. I'm not sure I like in that game. In a pure cooperative game, I think you should definitely lose more than you win. But in a competitive game, to have no one win kind of feels like a letdown. Now, it's probably thematic and trying to make a point, but gameplay-wise, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Now, I know I'm coming off negatives in this review, but I've left really my favorite piece for the end, the weather and the risk piece. This is, for me, almost overshadows the gripes I've had with the game. Almost, but not completely. I thought the idea of adding up all the CO2 and turning over cards to see if you get a disaster really the most enjoyable part of the game and offered an excellent decision point. Early on in the game, people are buying whatever they can or whatever they want and don't care about their CO2. But as the game goes on, you're almost always looking for ways to reduce your CO2 footprint. Again, very thematic. Having a disaster late in the game that you lose 3 citizens is brutal, but you know it could have happened. You cranked up your CO2 production, and that was the risk that you took. I loved that. So, would I recommend this game? This is hard. If I detach myself from the theme and the message I think I'm getting from playing the game, I would say no. There are too many issues I had with the gameplay. But I think I'm selling the game short. I think if you're looking at the package as a whole, what it's trying to say and get us think about, in that sense, I think I would recommend it. I thought the theme was excellent and they did a great job of implementing it into the gameplay. I really like the weather mechanism and the influence your decisions were making on your CO2 track. I like the art and really how simple the mechanisms were. Unfortunately, there are a number of things I had issues with. The card distribution. I was not a big fan of the blind draw of the citizen cards. The military felt it was out of place in a game really about environmentalism. And I wish they had a way to pick the game and kind of stuck to that. You know, is it 2v2 or is it a fully cooperative game? Just make a decision. I also wasn't a big fan of the constant updating of your status board. Every card I played, I was updating the board, recounting all the cards to make sure they're right. It became very tedious. But after all that, I'm going to give this game a 6.5 out of 10. If you want a game that makes you people think about the effect we're having on the environment through fun gameplay, this might be the game for you if you can overlook some of the gameplay flaws. And that's really the biggest thing holding this game back from a higher rating. And I find it so unfortunate as I find the theme so compelling and so well done to be held back by some gameplay missteps. But that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.